Since its creation all the way in 1963, Doctor Who has become a hugely popular franchise, stretching across a wide variety of platforms. Despite this success, Doctor Who has never quite been able to conquer the world of video games. But why is this? Join me in this video series where I take a look at every Doctor Who video game to have come out and examine just why they're so bad. In the 1980s, Doctor Who saw 3 official video games released for computers at the time. These games were extremely limited and incredibly hard, and none of them sold very well. But the very landscape of gaming was set to change in the 1990s. Games were bigger, better and badder than ever, thanks to games like Mortal Kombat and Doom. Even though Doctor Who had been cancelled in 1989, it still lived on in books and other media. It was no surprise then that Doctor Who would once again try to break through into the gaming industry. Would these games learn from the failed, brutally hard 80s games that came before? Let's take a look and find out for ourselves. The first Doctor Who game of the 90s was Dalek Attack, developed and published in 1992 by Alternative Software, a company known for such classics as Don Bradman Cricket 17 and Farlap? Also, rugby games. A lot of rugby games. Dalek Attack came out for most of the common consoles at the time, including a port for the dusty old ZX Spectrum. In fact, Dalek Attack was the last official release for the Spectrum, which is pretty interesting. The Spectrum version is barely worth talking about. It's pretty bad compared to the main version, but it's always nice when games get a proper port onto the previous system. So what should we expect from this game? Let's take a look at the back of the box. Okay, so it features the Daleks, obviously, and wait, what? I love this list of features, it's insane. Dinosaurs, ninjas, robo-sumo wrestlers? It doesn't make any sense, there's no context, and it's just like they're listing off every single thing in the game. And I love that it dares to have etc. at the end. Like, there's more? You put looters and armoured cars on the back, but there's even more you're not telling us? Also, it's great that they specify that there are monsters in this game. Yeah, thanks. Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit? Dalek Attack actually gives you a choice of what Doctor you play as. In most versions of the game you can choose between the 4th, 5th or 7th Doctor, but in the MS-DOS and Amiga versions you can play as the 2nd, 4th or 7th Doctor. So if you're a kid with an Amiga but loved the 5th Doctor, you just had to miss out. It's a pretty cool feature, but it doesn't really have any bearing on the game itself. In fact, no matter who you pick, the 7th Doctor is the only one to appear in the cutscenes, which kind of takes you out of it a bit. Dalek Attack is the result of someone who looked at arcade shoot-'em-up games and thought, okay, this, but Doctor Who. The opening level is a sewer level, aka everyone's favourite type of level in a video game. You control the Doctor as he flies along on a flying Segway, and dodge obstacles like that copter game you'd play during Year 9 IT class. It's a hard level, but if you manage to persist you reach the boss of the stage, a giant, 2-headed robot dragon thing. You know, that classic Doctor Who monster. This game is hard as hell. It's really difficult. The enemies are constantly shooting at you, so every time you step into a room, there's a high chance you'll die without getting a chance to dodge. At least Dalek Attack gives you a way to fight back, unlike the games in the 80s. You get a gun. They want you to believe it's a sonic screwdriver, but it's a gun. In classic shoot-'em-up style, there are pickups which give you double or triple fire. Sometimes K9 will show up to attack enemies, and sometimes a Time Lord will appear to give you upgrades or temporary boosts. It's quite helpful. Despite its difficulty, I really like Dalek Attack. It's a really fun game, even if there are no puzzles and it's very much out of character for the Doctor to be running around shooting everything that moves. I do like the levels, they're really distinctive and sometimes quite colourful. although you never really get much of a chance to look at them because the enemies are constantly coming at you, and it's often unclear on what parts of the level you can climb on. It's a game that still holds up quite well to this day, and I have to admit it's one of the best Doctor Who games out there, although there isn't exactly much competition. The next Doctor Who game was Destiny of the Doctors, which came out in 1997. Not to be confused with the Big Finish box set Destiny of the Doctor. That S is important. This game was developed by Studio Fish, who went on to do absolutely nothing and shut down in 2001. That's always a good sign. Destiny of the Doctors is one of your classic 90s multimedia CD-ROMs. Remember those? On paper, it's got everything going for it. It was written by legendary Doctor Who writer Terrance Dicks, and it has newly recorded audio from 4 incarnations of the Doctor, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart and the Anthony Ainley Master, who actually appears in live-action video segments of the game. That's pretty impressive for a Doctor Who game, but what looks good on paper doesn't always look good in practice, and that's definitely the case for Destiny of the Doctors. I absolutely hate this game. It's so painfully bad. The Time Lords really messed up with how they tortured the 12th Doctor. I think they'd have got a confession instantly if they made him play this game for an eternity. There is so much I hate about this game. Firstly, let's take a look at the graphics. It's all so blocky and unappealing. And look, I get it, it's a game from 1997. It's not exactly going to look like The Last of Us, but it just looks so awful. And the TARDIS walls are so disgustingly green. It looks like someone put up wallpaper from the 1800s, but even worse. The controls of this game are appalling. You slide around constantly and you always end up getting stuck into walls. The worst part is when you get stuck in a wall and an enemy decides to block you and stand closer than a drunk guy in a club with no sense of personal space. It's just awkward. Like, dude, can you stand back a bit? I'm trying to walk down a corridor here. And unfortunately, that's pretty much all the game is. Walking down corridors. The gameplay is so boring, it's just a bunch of fetch quests. The driving plot of the game is about rescuing the 7 Doctors from the Master's evil trap. You control Grak, a weird little floating jellyfish thing. I guess the developers need an excuse for the terrible floaty movement. You have to do little quests like searching for information on monsters or finding an item. Once you've done that, you have to go back to the Master and then defeat him in a different level for each Doctor. It's just so slow and tedious. You have to go back and forth constantly. The enemies are so slow that you can easily dodge around them, so they're no threat unless they corner you in the wall again. I just can't really find anything good about this game. The only real redeeming qualities are the wealth of new voice lines and the in-depth databases of the monsters and the Doctor, but that's about it really. Even though it has a bunch of iconic Doctor Who villains, it's really not fun to play and it just feels like a chore. Keep in mind that only 2 days after this game came out, Quake 2 was released. For those not in the know, Quake 2 was a fast-paced first-person shooter that was part of the gaming franchise responsible for changing the entire FPS genre and landscape of modern gaming. So it's safe to say Destiny of the Doctors was overshadowed just a little bit. Quake 2 is generally just such a better alternative to Destiny of the Doctors, because, you know, it's actually a competently made game. The last game I'm going to talk about today is the last game before the 2005 revival of Doctor Who. It's not really a Doctor Who game, but I'm going to mention it anyway. For the 2003 edition of the Wimbledon tennis tournament, the BBC Sport website released a flash game called TARDIS Tennis. The website page read, "Sick of the lack of British success at Wimbledon? Well, a solution is at hand, thanks to our time-travelling Great Britons, who used Doctor Who's TARDIS to guarantee success at SW19. So who were these time-travelling British legends? Well, there was Shakespeare, Queen Victoria, Winston Churchill, and John Lennon? Wait, what? Why is John Lennon there? I know he was an influential musician, but it just feels weird to put him alongside these historical figures. TARDIS Tennis is simple. It's a tennis game. That's literally it. The only link to Doctor Who is a conveniently placed TARDIS, much like the first adventure all the way back in the 1980s. You play a short match of tennis in a best of 3 style format. You pick one of the 3 characters and you play against the rest, culminating in a match against Churchill himself. Each of the 3 have different playstyles. Shakespeare is fast but weak, Queen Victoria is strong but slow, and John Lennon is just the all-rounder. No matter who I played as, I found this game pretty tough. It's almost purely luck-based, although maybe I'm just terrible at tennis games. I don't know why. I love tennis. I could almost never get past the first match. I found that John Lennon was the easiest to play as because he's an all-rounder, but I could never get past Shakespeare. The worst part about this game is the little voice clips that play whenever a point is won or lost.
Romeo, Romeo.
Each character has a little one-liner depending on whether they won a point or lost one. At first it's a nice little addition, but it gets very old very quick.
Do you see that, Yoko?
I hate Liverpool as much as the next guy, so if I have to hear this Poundland John Lennon one more time, I'm gonna throw him into the River Mersey, and that's a fate worse than death. So that's it for the video games of the so-called wilderness years of Doctor Who. I find it quite funny that this period held both one of the highest and lowest points in Doctor Who's gaming history. Dalek Attack is a nice little gem with its fun arcadey shoot-'em-up gameplay, but Destiny of the Doctors is truly a shambolic disgrace of a game, even by 90s CD-ROM standards. I can see what Destiny of the Doctors was going for, and if it had been done well it would have been a great little game, but it was definitely not done well. However, a new dawn was on the horizon.
Do you want to come with me?
In 2005, Doctor Who was revived for a new era and a new generation of fans. As gaming became more streamlined and mainstream, how would Doctor Who games adapt and change to take advantage of the new media landscape and the new audience? Find out next time when we find ourselves facing frightening flash games and characterless card games. So make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.